In the gentle haze of early morning, the world outside was just beginning to stir, but inside the modest apartment that Isabella now called home, time seemed to linger in quiet moments. The first few weeks following James' birth were marked by a delicate balance, a tenuous peace that neither Isabella nor Alexander could have predicted, yet one that both of them clung to with guarded hope. Each night, as the city lights dimmed and the frenetic pace of New York settled into a soft lull, Alexander transformed. Gone was the imperious businessman, the titan of industry known for his unyielding control. In his place was a man who cradled his newborn son with a tenderness that belied his former arrogance. Late at night, while Isabella lay awake listening to the rhythmic breathing of their sleeping child, she would find herself drawn to the soft sounds emanating from the next room. There, Alexander would gently rock James in his arms, murmuring lullabies that he had never before considered singing. The notes were soft and untrained, yet they spoke of a raw vulnerability that Isabella had never seen, a vulnerability that both comforted and pained her. During those early hours, as the first blush of dawn crept through the window, Isabella would catch fleeting glimpses of Alexander. He was a study in contrasts, a man whose very presence exuded strength, yet whose eyes now betrayed an inner turmoil. His every gesture, from the careful way he tucked a stray lock of hair behind his ear to the gentle way he adjusted James' tiny cap, hinted at a transformation that was still in progress. Isabella's heart wavered between hope and suspicion. Part of her yearned to believe that the man who once placed his empire above her had truly changed. Another part remembered the countless nights she spent alone, abandoned and hurt by his indifference. Their days were punctuated by a routine that was as fragile as it was familiar. Mornings began with soft light spilling into a kitchen that was slowly coming back to life. Alexander, with a humility that was almost startling, would arrive early to prepare breakfast, something as simple as scrambled eggs or a warm bowl of oatmeal, prepared with a meticulousness that belied his previous disdain for domestic chores. As he cooked, he would hum tunes of distant memories, tunes that hinted at the better times before their lives had been torn apart by pride and miscommunication. Isabella often found herself watching him from the doorway, her mind awash with conflicting emotions. There was a part of her that still resented him, that remembered a time when promises were broken and his absence was a constant ache in her heart. Yet, as she observed the way his eyes softened when he looked at James, a new understanding began to bloom. Perhaps, she thought, there was room for redemption, even if it came at a slow, painstaking pace. One particular evening, after a long day filled with the gentle chaos of caring for a newborn, the fragile peace between them reached a turning point. Isabella was seated in the living room, rocking James in her arms as she attempted to unwind from the day's exhaustion. Alexander, who had been silently preparing dinner, entered the room with a tentative smile. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air, mingling with the quiet hum of a lullaby that still lingered from the night before. "Bella," he began softly, using the old nickname that once brought a spark of warmth to her eyes, "I know there's so much that needs to be forgiven and so many wounds that need healing. But I want you to know, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Isabella's gaze met his, and for a moment, the weight of their shared past hung silently between them. The pain of yesteryears and the bitterness of broken promises seemed to dissolve into the soft glow of the lamplight. "You say that now," she replied, her voice trembling with both sorrow and hope, "but I can't help but wonder if it's just another promise waiting to be broken." Alexander stepped closer, his eyes earnest and filled with remorse. "I know I've hurt you more times than I can count," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was blind, selfish, and I never truly saw you until it was almost too late. But watching you with James, seeing the incredible strength you've shown, it's made me realize just how much I lost when I stopped caring." The conversation that unfolded that night was raw and unfiltered. They spoke of their failures and their regrets, of the long nights and the lonely days that had defined their separation. Isabella recounted the moments when she had felt utterly forsaken, while Alexander admitted to the crushing guilt of a man who had once valued business over love. As the hours slipped by, the dialogue between them began to weave a tentative tapestry of understanding, a thread of connection that hinted at the possibility of forgiveness. Yet, beneath the emerging closeness, there lingered the undeniable specter of their past. Isabella's mind wandered to those bitter memories, each one a painful reminder of a love that had once been vibrant and alive. And still, there was a part of her that clung to the belief that some wounds might never fully heal. But every time she looked at Alexander, watching him lovingly cradle their son, or listening to the quiet determination in his voice, she felt that perhaps, just perhaps, the man before her was not the same as the man who had once shattered her world. Over the following weeks, their interactions became a dance of cautious proximity. Alexander made a concerted effort to assist Isabella with the little things, fixing a broken chair, organizing the scattered baby supplies, even taking over the night feeding so she could steal a few hours of sleep. In these acts of quiet service, he was not trying to erase the past, but rather to build a foundation for a future where trust could slowly be rebuilt. On weekends, the city offered a rare pause from its relentless pace, and they would take James for gentle strolls in the park. In these moments, under the canopy of ancient trees and the soft murmur of urban life, Isabella allowed herself to imagine a different kind of future, a future where the scars of the past might be faded by the bright possibility of new beginnings. Alexander would point out the playful antics of children at the park, remarking on the simple joys of life, and she couldn't help but feel a flicker of the old warmth that had once defined their happier days. Yet, even in these small moments of grace, the tension of the past was never far away. During a quiet dinner one evening, as the last remnants of daylight faded into a soft twilight, Isabella's defenses momentarily rose. "Do you really think that by doing these little things, you can make up for everything?" she asked, her tone laced with a mixture of challenge and vulnerability. Alexander's eyes softened, and he paused before replying. "I don't expect these actions to erase the past, Bella," he said slowly. "I just hope they can help build something new, something better for all of us. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to be part of the healing process. I want to show you day by day that I'm here not as the man I was, but as the father of our son, and perhaps one day as someone you can trust again." His words, earnest and unadorned, struck a chord deep within her. For a long moment, Isabella was silent, her heart a tumult of conflicting emotions. The ache of old wounds was still there, but so was the possibility of something gentle and restorative. She closed her eyes, imagining a future where the ghosts of betrayal were replaced by the warmth of genuine care, where every shared smile and every tender touch could pave the way to forgiveness. In the quiet aftermath of their conversation, the apartment itself seemed to breathe a little easier. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant city sounds, even the muted cries of James as he drifted off to sleep, all formed a delicate symphony that spoke of both struggle and hope. Isabella lay awake that night, the pages of her past turning slowly in her mind, yet interspersed with tentative dreams of a future where love might mend the irreparable. As the days stretched into weeks, every gesture from Alexander, every small thoughtful act, helped to slowly chip away at the fortress she had built around her heart. It was not an easy process, and there were moments when the old doubts would surge back with the force of a tidal wave. Yet in those moments, the image of Alexander, standing by James' crib with a look of unwavering devotion, reminded her that change was possible, even if fragile and painfully gradual. In this period of tentative peace, the couple learned to navigate their new reality together. The space between them was filled not with the clamor of past disputes, but with the soft, uncertain whispers of healing. They were two wounded souls, finding solace in the simple unspoken act of sharing a life for the sake of the child who had brought them back together. And so, under the watchful gaze of a city that never truly sleeps, Isabella and Alexander began the arduous task of rebuilding. A reconstruction not of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but of small, everyday moments that, when woven together, held the promise of redemption. In the gentle cadence of their new life, there was both sorrow and hope, a bittersweet symphony that, over time, might just lead them to a future where love could flourish once more. In the midst of an unusually serene autumn evening, the apartment that had recently borne witness to quiet reconciliations and small hopeful gestures now became the stage for a confrontation neither had fully anticipated. The soft clink of dishes being cleared away, the low hum of a forgotten television in the background, and the gentle lull of a city preparing for night all set an almost deceptive calm over the scene. Alexander, emboldened by the slow and painful progress of healing, had planned what he believed might be a turning point, a proposal that he hoped would serve as both an apology for past failures and a promise for a better future. After tucking their son James into a peaceful sleep, Alexander invited Isabella to join him in the living room. The space, lit by the warm glow of a single lamp, seemed to shrink around the intensity of the moment. He sat on the edge of the worn sofa, his eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. The air was heavy with unspoken words as he reached into a small velvet box tucked away in his jacket pocket. "Bella," he began, his voice soft yet trembling with earnest emotion, "I've spent so many nights thinking about what we lost, and what we might still have. I know I can't undo the past, but I believe that every moment with James, every shared smile and tear, is a chance to start again." His eyes searched hers, pleading for a sign of understanding, of acceptance. Isabella's heart pounded as she absorbed his words, each syllable laced with a sincerity that threatened to both soothe and unsettle her. But beneath the gentle cadence of his confession, there lingered a persistent fear that his proposal was less an act of true love and more a desperate attempt to assuage his own guilt. Before she could find her voice, Alexander continued, "I know I've hurt you in ways that may never fully heal. But I want to spend every day trying. I want us to be a family, not just for James, but for ourselves. Will you marry me?" In that suspended moment, time seemed to stand still. The glitter of the tiny ring caught the dim light, a symbol of promise that Isabella wasn't sure she could accept. Instead of the joyful tears Alexander had hoped for, her eyes flashed with anger and a deep-seated sorrow. "You don't love me, Alexander," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of pent-up resentment. "You just don't want to feel guilty." Her words, sharp as broken glass, sliced through the fragile hope that had just been kindled. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, a silence filled with the echoes of their past failures, the promises broken in the quiet of lonely nights. Isabella's tone grew colder, each word deliberate and laden with a history of disappointment. "I can't let our future be built on the ashes of regret. I won't be your safety net, your second chance born out of guilt. I deserve more than that, and so does James." Alexander's face contorted with pain, a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. He had envisioned this moment as a step toward redemption, a path to rebuilding trust that had been shattered so long ago. Instead, it felt like a door slammed shut in his face, leaving him in the dark with his remorse. "Bella," he started, voice faltering as he reached out, desperate to bridge the widening gap. But Isabella recoiled, her eyes brimming with a mixture of defiance and sorrow. "You think a ring can erase all the nights I spent waiting alone? That it can make up for every time you chose your empire over us?" Her words trembled not only with anger, but with the raw vulnerability of a woman who had once believed in a love that could conquer all. "I can't accept this proposal because it's not coming from a place of true love, it's coming from your need to silence your guilt." The room felt suffocating, the air heavy with the burden of unmet expectations and old wounds. Alexander sat back, the velvet box lying forgotten on the coffee table, as he struggled to reconcile the man he was with the man she had once loved. In that painful instant, the proposal that was meant to be a bridge toward reconciliation became yet another chasm between them. For a long time, neither spoke. Instead, the silence filled the space with memories of missed opportunities, promises unfulfilled, and the haunting question of whether love could ever be resurrected from the ruins of their past. The proposal, intended to be a new beginning, had inadvertently cast a stark light on the shadows they both carried, shadows that might require far more than a promise or a ring to finally dissipate. Just as a hesitant hope began to flicker in Isabella's heart, a hope that perhaps the man she once loved could truly change, an unexpected and devastating scandal shattered the fragile peace they had been painstakingly building. It started with a flood of notifications on her phone one chilly morning. The screen displayed an insistent headline: "Billionaire Alexander Blackwell rekindles romance while ex-wife raises his son." Her breath hitched as she opened the article, revealing a series of carefully staged photographs. There, under the soft ambient lighting of an upscale restaurant, was Alexander, smiling, relaxed, and unmistakably at ease, with none other than Vanessa Ford, his former flame. The image was too candid, too intimate. It painted a picture that was hard for Isabella to ignore. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. Every detail, from the way Alexander's hand rested casually on Vanessa's shoulder to the warm, inviting glow of the venue, seemed to scream of a romance rekindled. Isabella's mind raced, her heart pounding with a mix of betrayal and despair. Had she been foolish, clinging to the belief that the man who once neglected her could ever change? The very foundation of her tentative forgiveness began to crumble under the weight of the public spectacle. Later that day, when Alexander returned home, the tension in the air was palpable. Isabella, her eyes glistening with unshed tears and simmering anger, confronted him immediately. "How can I trust you, Alexander?" she demanded, her voice quivering between hurt and fury. "How can I believe that you're truly committed to us when you're out there, with Vanessa?" Alexander's face fell, a mix of disbelief and regret clouding his features. He attempted to explain, his tone low and earnest. "Bella, it wasn't what you think, it was a business dinner, nothing more. Vanessa was there purely in a professional capacity." He reached out, trying to bridge the gap that now yawned between them, but his words fell on ears too raw to hear reason. "No," Isabella interrupted sharply, her voice rising. "Your past isn't just something I can ignore. I see the photographs, I read the headlines. It feels like you're back to the old ways, playing games, hiding truths. The sting of her words was palpable. I trusted you enough to start believing in a future together, for James' sake even if not for mine. Now, I don't know if I can. In the days that followed, the scandal's reverberations echoed throughout their lives. Social media buzzed with speculations and heated debates. Isabella found herself caught in a maelstrom of public opinion and private pain. Every mention of Vanessa, every flash of paparazzi images, drove a wedge deeper into her heart. Alexander, meanwhile, was forced to confront the consequences of his past indiscretions. His attempt to explain had only intensified the hurt, making him realize that some wounds, once reopened, were difficult to mend. Isabella's trust, so carefully nurtured over recent weeks, now seemed as fragile as glass, teetering on the edge of shattering completely. The betrayal, whether born of old habits or misinterpreted circumstances, had left her questioning not only Alexander's commitment but also the future they were trying so desperately to rebuild. The promise of redemption and second chances was slipping away, replaced by the bitter taste of a second betrayal that threatened to unravel everything they had fought so hard to restore. In the wake of the scandal and the unraveling trust, the fragile threads holding Isabella and Alexander's renewed family together began to strain under an all-consuming fear of losing the one person who had, in many ways, become her sole anchor, their son James. The revelation of Alexander's alleged indiscretion with Vanessa had not only shattered Isabella's heart but also ignited an internal battle over what truly was best for James. The once quiet apartment now buzzed with hushed conversations, frantic phone calls, and the grim certainty that a custody dispute was inevitable. Isabella, her heart heavy with a mixture of betrayal and maternal protectiveness, found herself thrust into a legal labyrinth. She met with a seasoned family law attorney who explained the harsh realities of custody battles, a terrain where wealth and influence could often tip the scales unfairly. Every detail, every past misstep, was scrutinized under the cold light of legal proceedings. In her mind, Isabella pictured a courtroom where Alexander's power and affluence would overshadow her own quiet determination, leaving her vulnerable to losing James. The thought was unbearable. At the same time, Alexander, deeply pained by the fresh wounds of mistrust and misunderstanding, wrestled with his own conscience. Despite the mounting evidence of his past errors and the public's critical gaze, he found himself torn between the instinct to protect his legacy and the overwhelming desire to remain a steadfast presence in James' life. With every legal document and every word exchanged with his attorneys, he felt the weight of his previous misdeeds. His every action now was measured not in terms of business acumen or financial might, but in terms of his commitment to making amends, for James, and perhaps for the shattered remnants of the love he once shared with Isabella. The day of the first custody hearing arrived with a heavy, foreboding air. The courthouse was a place of sterile marble halls and hushed whispers, where time itself seemed to slow as families and attorneys navigated their personal battles. Isabella sat in the cold waiting room, her hands trembling as she clutched a faded photograph of James smiling in a park, a memory from a simpler time before the world had become so complicated. Each tick of the clock amplified her anxiety, reminding her that the decisions made in that room could determine the course of her life, and her son's forever. Across the room, Alexander's presence was a stark contrast. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that seemed to echo his business persona, he exuded a quiet confidence that belied the storm raging within. His eyes, however, betrayed his inner turmoil as he repeatedly glanced at his phone, reading messages that he knew all too well could stir more discord. The tension between them was palpable even before they were called into the courtroom. When the proceedings finally began, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and guarded hostility. The judge, a figure of stern authority, reviewed the case with clinical detachment, while both Isabella's and Alexander's attorneys sparred over every detail, from financial statements to parenting records. Isabella's attorney passionately argued that her love for James, combined with her day-to-day nurturing, provided the stable environment their son needed. Conversely, Alexander's legal team presented a carefully crafted narrative of a devoted father, one whose resources could ensure that James never lacked anything. As the hearing progressed, Isabella's emotions threatened to spill over. Every testimony and piece of evidence recalled the tumult of her past, nights of loneliness, days filled with the sting of neglect, and the gnawing fear that her son might one day be used as a pawn in a game of power and retribution. Alexander, seated across from her, seemed to bear the burden of every misstep, his eyes downcast, reflective of regrets that words could hardly express. In a brief recess, Isabella found herself alone in a quiet corridor of the courthouse. The cool stone walls and dim lighting provided little comfort as she wrestled with the implications of the battle before her. Tears welled up unbidden, and for a moment, the weight of loneliness threatened to overcome her. It was then that she heard soft footsteps approaching, a hesitant knock on the door of her temporary solitude. It was Alexander. His expression was one of quiet sorrow, and in that moment, the hardened resolve in his eyes softened into something far more vulnerable. "Bella," he began, his voice low and steady, "I need to say something." There was no pretense of formality, only a raw honesty that made her heart clench in both fear and longing. "I know you're afraid," he continued, his words echoing in the silent corridor. "I know you think that I'm trying to use my wealth and power to take you and James away from what you deserve. But I can't let that happen. I love my son, and I love you in ways that go beyond my selfish past. If fighting this battle means risking everything and tearing our little family apart, then I'm not going to do it." His voice cracked, laden with emotion that had long been hidden beneath layers of pride and regret.
The confession hit Isabella like a tidal wave.
In that intimate, suspended moment, the courtroom, the legal proceedings, and all the accusations faded into the background. She could see in his tear-filled eyes, a man who was finally willing to let go of his ego, who was prepared to sacrifice everything rather than win a custody battle that might destroy the only thing left that truly mattered. Alexander continued, "If the court believes that you're the better guardian for James, then I'll withdraw my claim without hesitation. I'll do whatever it takes so that he always has a home filled with love, and I promise I will always be there for him, no matter what." Those words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply within Isabella. They were not the grand declarations of eternal love she had once dreamed of, but they were genuine, spoken by a man who was willing to let go of his pride for the sake of his son's well-being. The corridors of the courthouse seemed to grow quieter as she absorbed his vow. In that moment, the harsh reality of the legal battle softened into something more human, more fragile, and infinitely more real. Returning to the courtroom, the air was charged with a new energy. Alexander's legal team quickly submitted a revised statement indicating his decision to withdraw from the custody fight. The judge, noting the unexpected turn of events, allowed a brief recess to update the records. In the charged silence that followed, Isabella felt a complex mix of relief, sorrow, and an emerging hope, a hope that perhaps this painful journey might finally lead to some form of reconciliation, or at least to a future where James was never caught in the crossfire of adult ambitions.
Outside the courtroom, beneath a sky overcast with a promise of rain, Isabella and Alexander met again.
The tension between them had transformed from fierce hostility into a tentative truce. Standing a few feet apart, with James safely cradled in a protective embrace by a court-appointed guardian for the time being, they exchanged no more than a few quiet words. Yet, in those few words lay the weight of everything unsaid, a shared acknowledgement of past mistakes, of pain inflicted and endured, and a mutual desire to prioritize their son's well-being over their own pride. For Isabella, the withdrawal of Alexander's custody claim was not an unequivocal victory. It was a bittersweet concession, a recognition that the scars of the past ran deep and that the wounds might never fully close. But it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where both parents could, at last, focus on what truly mattered, providing James with a life free from the constant shadow of their personal conflicts. As they walked out of the courthouse, the rain began to fall softly, washing away the remnants of the day's strife. In the gentle patter of raindrops against the pavement, Isabella found a fragile symbol of renewal. The battle for custody had been fought not with harsh legal maneuvers or public spectacle, but with a quiet, heartbreaking understanding that sometimes, the greatest strength lies in the willingness to yield for the sake of love. Though the future remained uncertain, and the wounds of the past still throbbed painfully beneath the surface, Isabella allowed herself a single hopeful thought. Perhaps this hard-won peace was the first real step toward healing. And as Alexander's silhouette merged with a soft, rain-drenched evening, both parents, each marked by their own regrets and hopes, carried forward the promise that, no matter what storms might come, they would always stand by their son, united in the belief that his future was worth every sacrifice. That fateful night, the city was transformed by a tempest that seemed to mirror the turmoil within Isabella's heart. The sky roiled with dark, angry clouds as a violent storm unleashed torrents of rain, accompanied by relentless thunder and flashes of lightning that illuminated the streets in stark, ephemeral moments. The power flickered and died across the neighborhood, leaving the world outside the small apartment plunged into an eerie, stormy twilight. Inside, Isabella was alone with James, her precious son, whose tiny rhythmic breaths had been her anchor through the preceding weeks of uncertainty and heartache. She had spent the day trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy amidst the lingering echoes of the custody battle and Alexander's conflicted promises. But as the night deepened, a sudden chilling silence fell. In one horrifying, heart-stopping moment, James stopped breathing. Panic surged through Isabella like a tidal wave. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone, her mind racing in a chaos of dread and disbelief. The sterile beeping of the emergency alert on her device barely registered as she tried to rouse her son. The sound of his silent, still form sent her heart into a freefall. Clad in a nightgown damp with tears and rain, she rushed to the door, desperate to escape the suffocating confines of her apartment, even as the storm outside mirrored her inner anguish. The wind howled like a living thing as she fumbled with her keys. Her car, an old sedan that had seen better days, protested with a sputter and a series of coughs before failing to start altogether. The relentless downpour turned the streets into raging rivers of water and debris. With each passing second, the weight of helplessness grew heavier. In her desperation, Isabella dialed Alexander's number with shaking fingers, her voice barely above a whisper as she pleaded, "Please, I need you." "James, he's not breathing." Almost as if guided by fate, Alexander answered amid the cacophony of the storm. There was no hesitation in his tone, only immediate resolve. "I'm coming," he said, his voice firm yet laced with a kind of concern that cut through the noise of the storm and the chaos of the moment. Without a word, he grabbed his keys and headed out into the raging night. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity as Isabella huddled in the doorway of her darkened apartment, clutching James close to her chest. Every flash of lightning illuminated her tear-streaked face, revealing a portrait of raw vulnerability and despair. Outside, the streets were unrecognizable, a landscape of flooded sidewalks, overturned trash cans and relentless rain. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, a beacon of hope began to shine through the tumult. In the distance, a car's headlights cut through the gloom, growing steadily nearer despite the storm's fury. Alexander arrived in his sleek black car, a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm. The vehicle's tires splashed through puddles as he navigated the slick roads with determined precision. Every second felt like an eternity to Isabella, who watched from the doorway as he parked a short distance away. Without waiting for her invitation, he dashed towards the apartment building, his silhouette barely visible against the tempestuous backdrop. Inside the dimly lit corridor, the sound of rain and the distant roar of thunder merged with the pounding of Alexander's heart. Each step he took resonated with an urgency born of desperation and regret. When he reached the apartment door, he found Isabella standing there, her eyes wide with fear, holding James as if he were both shield and solace. In that moment, the years of estrangement and bitter words seemed to vanish, replaced by an undeniable truth. Their shared love for this innocent life eclipsed all past grievances. "Isabella," Alexander's voice was soft yet resolute as he knelt beside her, gently taking the little bundle from her arms. He checked James's pulse with trembling hands, his eyes searching for any sign of life. The seconds stretched interminably as the storm outside beat against the windows, and the world narrowed to that fragile moment in the hallway. Finally, a weak but steady beat registered under his fingers, a sign that James was clinging to life. Relief mingled with anxiety as Alexander carefully wrapped James in a warm blanket he had grabbed from the back seat. "We need to get him to the hospital now," he said, urgency etched into every word. With Isabella nodding silently, they moved together in the storm's chaos, an unspoken agreement uniting them in purpose. Navigating through flooded streets and the relentless downpour, Alexander's car became a sanctuary amidst the chaos. Every mile driven was a battle against time, every red light a torment of suspended hope. As they sped through the storm, Isabella's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The anger and betrayal from recent days warred with the undeniable reality of Alexander's devotion in that moment. Watching him in the harsh, unyielding light of the storm, a man who risked everything without a second thought for his own safety, forced her to confront the complexity of her feelings. In the midst of tragedy, the facade of wealth and power that had once seemed so imposing was stripped away, revealing a man capable of profound tenderness and sacrifice. Upon arriving at the hospital, the trio was ushered through the busy emergency entrance. The sterile environment, stark in contrast to the wild, unpredictable night outside, provided a temporary haven where hope was measured in heartbeats and the steady hum of medical machines.
In the waiting area, under fluorescent lights that buzzed softly overhead, Isabella sat in Adaze.
Alexander remained close by, his face etched with worry and remorse as he paced silently. Every so often, he would pause to glance at Isabella, searching her eyes for a hint of forgiveness, a sign that perhaps this ordeal might be the beginning of something new. In that sterile, anxious space, time seemed to both slow and accelerate. The minutes felt like hours as doctors and nurses moved efficiently through the corridors, their voices a mix of technical jargon and compassionate reassurances.
Isabella's mind flashed back to countless moments. The loneliness of past nights, the echo of empty promises, and the quiet desolation of a life nearly wasted in pursuit of fleeting ambition.
Now, in the raw immediacy of the hospital, those memories were intermingled with a fierce protective love for James, a love that demanded healing and unity, even in the face of overwhelming hurt. Outside the hospital, the storm raged on, its fury a reminder of the uncontrollable forces that life often hurled our way. Yet within those walls, a different kind of storm was being weathered, a storm of emotions, of rediscovered devotion, and of the painful necessary journey toward redemption. Alexander stood by a large window overlooking the storm, his eyes reflecting both the tempest outside and the tumult within. In that reflective moment, he vowed silently that he would never again allow pride or the trappings of power to stand between him and his family. Every gust of wind, every flash of lightning, seemed to echo his determination, that he would be the father James deserved, and that he would fight, no matter the cost, for the fragile chance at reconciliation with Isabella. When the doctors finally emerged from the operating room, their faces cautious but hopeful, a collective sigh seemed to sweep through the waiting area. Isabella clutched James to her chest as she listened intently to the update. Though the night had been long and harrowing, and though the future remained shrouded in uncertainty, the storm had revealed an undeniable truth. Sometimes, the most profound change comes when all the masks are stripped away, leaving only raw, unfiltered humanity behind. As the rain began to taper off outside, replaced by a lingering drizzle that carried the scent of renewal, Isabella found herself staring at Alexander. In his eyes, she saw not the cold, distant businessman of the past, but a man who had risked everything on a stormy night to save the life of his child, and perhaps in doing so, save what remained of their broken family. In that charged silence, as the hospital lights flickered in tandem with her racing heart, she realized that this tempest, with all its fury and fear, had changed everything. It had unearthed buried truths and forced both of them to confront the raw, unyielding need for forgiveness and transformation. The storm outside might have subsided, but inside, something profound had taken root, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the path to healing lay not in grand gestures or sweeping promises, but in the quiet, desperate moments when love proved stronger than fear. And in that moment of shared vulnerability, as Alexander and Isabella stood together beneath the stark hospital lights, the promise of a new beginning, however uncertain, shimmered on the horizon like the first tentative rays of dawn after a long tumultuous night. In the quiet aftermath of that stormy night, as the hospital corridors began to settle into a calm that belied the earlier chaos, a new chapter quietly unfolded in the hearts of Isabella and Alexander. The emergency had passed, and James was now stable in the recovery room, a small fragile victory that seemed to echo the possibility of healing. In the sterile stillness of the hospital waiting area, the harsh fluorescent lights casting long softened shadows on tired faces, both parents found themselves suspended in a moment of raw vulnerability and introspection. For hours, Isabella sat in a corner of the waiting room, cradling James in her arms as he slept fitfully. The relentless beeping of monitors and the distant murmur of medical staff had become a strange lullaby, a constant reminder of how precarious life could be. Her mind, usually so guarded and determined, wandered through the events of the past few days, the bitter taste of betrayal, the shattering of trust, and now the life-altering crisis that had nearly taken her son away. In the midst of that emotional maelstrom, she began to realize that the intensity of their shared fear had also unveiled a deeper, more complex truth. Both she and Alexander were irrevocably defined by their capacity for change. Alexander, on the other hand, paced the corridor with a mixture of urgency and sorrow. Every step echoed his inner conflict, the relentless desire to make amends clashing with the heavy burden of past mistakes. He remembered the countless sleepless nights spent in the silence of his penthouse, the guilt that gnawed at him as he replayed his failures over and over again. Now, as he watched Isabella's trembling hands cradle their son, he saw not just the woman he had once loved, but a fierce, resilient spirit tempered by loss and unyielding hope. In her eyes, he caught the glimmer of pain and a spark of something new, a cautious readiness to forgive, provided that he could prove his sincerity with time and effort. When the doctors finally emerged from the operating theater with the hopeful news that James's condition was improving, a hush fell over the room. It was as if that single pronouncement had momentarily united the fractured remnants of their hearts. As the medical staff busied themselves with routine checks and gentle reassurances, Alexander found himself drawn to the quiet alcove where Isabella sat. Tentatively, he approached her, his footsteps soft against the cold linoleum floor. "Isabella," he began, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the ambient quiet. "I know there's nothing I can say or do to erase the past, but tonight I want you to know that I'm here. I'm here not because I want to reclaim what we lost, but because I'm terrified of losing what we still have." His eyes searched hers, pleading for an opportunity to speak the unspoken truths that had haunted him for so long. For several long moments, she simply looked at him, her eyes, still glistening with unshed tears, reflecting the myriad emotions of that stormy night. Finally, in a voice that trembled with both sorrow and tentative hope, she replied, "I've been so afraid, Alexander. Afraid that every time I let my guard down, I'd be hurt all over again. I've built walls around myself to protect what little I have left. And yet, tonight, watching you risk everything for James, I can't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, you're trying to break down those walls." Her words, fragile and earnest, seemed to bridge the chasm between them. Alexander took a deep breath, his heart pounding as if to echo her vulnerability. "I want to prove to you that I can change," he said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "Not for any grand gesture or sweeping promise, but in the small, everyday actions that matter. I want to be there for you, and for James, in every way possible. I'm willing to work on myself, to listen, to learn, even if it takes a lifetime." In that moment, the hospital corridor transformed into a sanctum of possibility. Their conversation meandered slowly, touching upon memories both bitter and sweet. Isabella recounted the lonely nights when Alexander's absence had been a constant, echoing reminder of promises broken. She spoke of her pain when his ambition had left her feeling abandoned, a relic of a past that had seemed impossible to overcome. Alexander listened with an intensity that spoke of genuine remorse, a silent acknowledgement of every mistake, every moment of neglect that had led them to this fragile precipice. "I was selfish," Alexander admitted, his voice raw with regret. "I was so consumed with building my empire that I forgot what truly mattered, us, our family, the life we could have shared. I know words are empty without action, and I don't expect you to trust me immediately. But I promise you, I'm going to spend every day proving that I'm more than just the sum of my past errors." Isabella's eyes softened as she listened. In the midst of her own swirling doubts and fears, she recognized the sincerity in his confession. It wasn't an attempt at manipulation or a mere platitude meant to soothe her wounded pride. It was a genuine plea for a second chance, a humble admission of his own frailties. Slowly, she began to lower the defenses she had so carefully constructed over the years. The hours passed, and soon the harsh lights of the hospital gave way to the gentle glow of early morning. In the quiet moments before the day fully dawned, Isabella and Alexander sat side by side on a narrow bench by a window, their shared silence a silent testament to the unspoken hope that had begun to take root. Outside, the remnants of the storm were still visible, puddles glimmering in the weak light, droplets clinging to the edges of the glass. But inside, the storm had eased into a contemplative calm. In that tender silence, Isabella finally allowed herself to speak about the future, not the uncertain, precarious future of litigation and custody battles, but a future that could be built on mutual understanding and shared responsibility.
"I'm scared," she confessed softly.
"Scared that I'll always be waiting for you to prove yourself, that every time I let you in, I'll be hurt again."
"I need time, Alexander.
I need to see that you're truly committed, not just to James but to us." Alexander reached out slowly, his hand hovering uncertainly before gently resting atop hers. "I understand," he said, his voice imbued with a quiet determination. "I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to show you that I'm capable of change, that I can be the partner and father you both deserve. Let this be the beginning of a slow, deliberate process, one where every small step we take together rebuilds the trust that's been shattered." For a long while, they sat there, entwined in a fragile embrace of hope and regret. The hospital, with all its clinical detachment, bore witness to a transformation that transcended its sterile walls, a transformation rooted in the raw, unfiltered human desire to heal and to be loved again. The weight of their shared history, laden with sorrow and lost opportunities, did not vanish completely in that moment. Rather, it settled around them like a heavy cloak, a reminder of what had been and what could never be forgotten. Yet within that same cloak of memories, there shone a promise of something new, a promise that the scars of yesterday could, over time, be transformed into the badges of survival and growth. Isabella and Alexander agreed, without the need for grand declarations, to take the first tentative steps toward rebuilding their lives, not as the perfect couple they had once imagined, but as flawed, resilient individuals striving for redemption. They spoke of small, concrete plans, attending family counseling sessions, sharing quiet dinners without the intrusion of business or legal disputes, and most importantly, focusing on the happiness and well-being of James. As the morning light grew stronger, casting golden hues over the hospital's somber corridors, the couple prepared to leave. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the wounds of the past would not heal overnight. But in that moment, beneath the glow of a new day, a new understanding had emerged, one that acknowledged the pain of what had come before while daring to dream of a future where love, trust, and mutual respect could once again flourish. Walking side by side out of the hospital, Isabella and Alexander carried with them the quiet resolve to let time be their healer. They knew that every day would bring challenges, and that forgiveness was not a destination but a continuous journey. Yet with each step they took, each act of kindness, every shared smile, and every moment of genuine care, they forged a new path, one that held the possibility of transforming their fractured past into a foundation strong enough to support the delicate hope of tomorrow. In that new light, as they faced the uncertain horizon together, both understood that true healing began with acceptance of each other, of their mistakes, and of the love that, despite everything, still burned quietly in the depths of their hearts. After the emotional turbulence of recent events, Alexander proposed an idea that felt both daring and nostalgic, a chance to revisit the remnants of a past that had once been filled with promise. He suggested a visit to the old home they had once shared, a place where every wall, every corner, held echoes of laughter, tears, and dreams that had slowly faded into memory. Reluctantly, and with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, Isabella agreed. They set out early on a crisp, clear morning, the cityscape bathed in the soft glow of dawn as if inviting them to step back in time. The drive itself was quiet, a wordless journey punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the occasional sigh from Isabella, a sound that carried years of heartache and hope. As they neared the familiar neighborhood, a flood of memories began to rush back. The streets, lined with old brick buildings and modest trees, felt like silent witnesses to a life that had once been their shared sanctuary. Upon reaching the old home, a modest townhouse tucked away on a quiet side street, the building seemed almost to breathe history. Its weathered facade, with peeling paint and a creaky front door, was both a reminder of what had been and a testament to time's relentless march. Stepping inside, Isabella was struck by how intimately the space reflected their former life together. The living room, with its faded floral sofa and the dented coffee table that had once hosted countless board games and whispered secrets, evoked memories of laughter-filled evenings and moments of tenderness that had been all too brief. Alexander led her slowly through each room, his footsteps echoing softly against the hardwood floors. In the kitchen, where the aroma of freshly baked bread had once mingled with their shared dreams of a future, Isabella paused. The counters, now bare, seemed to hold a silent promise of better days. They lingered by the window that overlooked a small, overgrown garden, a place where they had spent lazy Sunday afternoons, planning a life that now felt so distant. As they moved from room to room, each space ignited a cascade of recollections. In the bedroom, the faint imprint of where they had once shared secrets and desires was palpable. Isabella's heart ached as she recalled both the joy and the sorrow that had coexisted within these walls. There had been nights filled with whispered promises of forever and days when silence spoke louder than any argument. The bittersweet amalgamation of love and regret was almost overwhelming. In a moment of quiet intimacy, Alexander stopped near a small, chipped mirror mounted on the wall, a mirror that had once captured their smiles and reflected their shared hopes. "I remember when we'd spend hours just talking about everything," he said softly, his voice heavy with both nostalgia and remorse. "I used to think that nothing could ever break us apart. I was so sure that our love would always be enough." Isabella's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she replied, "There was a time when I believed that too. But then life happened, our choices, our mistakes. I remember the warmth of this room, the way you used to make me feel like I was the center of your world. And now, standing here, it feels as if the past is both haunting and healing." They spent what felt like hours wandering through the familiar spaces, sharing fragments of memories, both joyous and painful. Alexander spoke of moments he had long buried, the spontaneous dance in the kitchen, the lazy afternoons spent reading together in the living room, the quiet evenings when hope had flickered even in the darkest times. Isabella, in turn, recounted her own memories, the gentle reassurance in Alexander's eyes before their world began to crumble, the tender gestures that had once promised a lifetime of care. Each recollection was like a small spark, illuminating the room with the light of what had been and hinting at what might yet be reclaimed. The visit wasn't merely a nostalgic journey, it was an unspoken plea for understanding, a hope that by confronting the ghosts of their shared past, they might find the strength to forge a new future, however uncertain it might be. In the faded light of late afternoon, as they stood in what had once been the heart of their home, both Isabella and Alexander felt the weight of all that had transpired between them. The old home, with all its imperfections, bore witness to the transformation of their love, from a radiant, all-consuming flame to a fragile, flickering ember struggling to survive amid the ashes. It was in that moment, amid the echoes of memories and the silent acknowledgement of their mistakes, that they began to grasp the possibility of healing. Even if the past could never be erased, perhaps it could serve as the foundation upon which a more honest, more compassionate future could be built. Walking back to the car as twilight settled over the neighborhood, the old home receded into the distance, a silent monument to what was and a subtle promise of what could be. The journey down memory lane had been painful, yet it was also cathartic. For the first time in a long while, Isabella allowed herself to hope that their shared past, with all its scars, might someday be transformed into the very bedrock of a renewed connection. And as the city lights began to twinkle in the approaching night, both of them carried away a fragile but undeniable truth, that even in the ruins of what once was, there lay the potential for rebirth and redemption. The early morning light filtered softly through the sheer curtains, casting a gentle glow over the apartment as if hinting at a new beginning. Isabella sat at the small kitchen table, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the lingering memory of last night's conversations. It was in these quiet moments, when the world was still waking, that the weight of her choices pressed upon her more heavily than ever. Earlier that day, as she sifted through the routine emails on her tablet, a subject line caught her eye: "Opportunity awaits in Paris." Her heart skipped a beat. The message was an invitation from a prestigious arts organization in Paris, one that offered not only a career-defining position, but also the chance to lead creative projects on an international stage. For a woman who had long struggled with self-doubt and a deep-seated desire to reclaim her identity beyond the confines of her personal turmoil, the job represented both hope and escape, a promise of a future filled with artistic fulfillment and professional recognition. As she read through the offer letter, every word resonated with possibility. The position was designed for someone with vision, someone who could weave stories with art and bring to life projects that celebrated human resilience. It was everything Isabella had dreamed of, yet it came with a price. The opportunity was in Paris, a city of romance and reinvention, but accepting it meant uprooting her life, leaving behind the fragile reconciliation she had begun to forge with Alexander, and most painfully, parting from the familiar streets that held memories of both pain and recovery. Isabella's thoughts swirled like a storm within her. The job was a chance to rebuild herself, to finally step out of the shadows of her past and embrace a future where she could be valued for her talents. Yet, her heart remained tethered to New York, the city that had witnessed her struggles, her triumphs, and the tentative beginnings of healing. James's laughter, the small victories of every day, and even the bittersweet presence of Alexander in her life had all woven together a tapestry that she wasn't ready to dismantle without careful thought. That afternoon, as the golden light deepened and the city outside bustled with the pulse of possibility, Isabella found herself pacing the living room. The silence of the space was punctuated by the soft, measured steps of Alexander, who had sensed the unrest in her eyes since she returned from the hospital. He approached her cautiously, his gaze gentle and understanding. "Bella," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I know that you have a difficult decision ahead of you. I see the way you've been wrestling with this offer, and I want you to know that I support you, whatever you decide." His words, delivered with a quiet strength that contrasted with the turbulence of her emotions, filled the room. Isabella paused, her hand resting on the back of a worn armchair as memories of their past, both the beauty and the pain, washed over her. "Alexander," she began slowly, her voice trembling with both uncertainty and longing, "this opportunity, it's everything I ever wanted professionally. Paris is a dream, a chance to rebuild who I am. And yet, every time I think about leaving New York, I feel the weight of all that I've been through here. I'm torn between reclaiming my passion and holding on to what we've started to rebuild together." Alexander stepped closer, his eyes reflecting a blend of compassion and regret. "I know, Bella. I know that my mistakes have hurt you deeply, and I can't change the past. But I also know that you deserve every opportunity to thrive. If Paris calls you, if it's the path to your true self, then I want you to go. I won't hold you back, not if it means you can find the fulfillment you've always longed for." His declaration was not a surrender, but rather an acknowledgement of her right to grow, an admission that their journey was as much about individual healing as it was about their shared future. Yet, even as he spoke, Isabella felt her heart ache at the thought of distance between them. The idea of physical separation brought forth fears of slipping trust and unspoken sorrows that might once again erode the fragile peace they had fought so hard to establish. The conversation that unfolded was deep and winding, a blend of reminiscence, hope, and raw vulnerability. They talked about the countless hours spent in silence after long days, the whispered apologies and tentative reconciliations, and the tiny moments of joy that had begun to bridge the chasm of their past. Alexander recalled the tender nights when he would hold James close, watching over him with a fierce, unwavering love, a love that now extended imperfectly to Isabella. He confessed his own uncertainties, admitting that while he wished to be the man she could rely on, he too was learning how to navigate this new landscape of forgiveness and self-improvement. Isabella listened, tears glistening in her eyes, as the man she once thought she had lost to ambition and pride now spoke with quiet humility. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Scared that if I go to Paris, I'll leave behind not just a city, but the possibility of what we might still build together. I fear that the distance will widen the gap that I'm only just beginning to understand." Alexander reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with a gentleness that spoke of both respect and a tentative promise. "Bella, sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that lead to the greatest growth. Whether you're in New York or Paris, I want you to follow your heart. I believe that true love, our love, can endure the physical distances if it's rooted in genuine understanding and care. And if your heart calls you to Paris, then I will support you every step of the way. We can find a way to keep James at the center of our lives, no matter where we are." The room seemed to hold its breath as they sat together, their shared silence more eloquent than any words could be. The future loomed large and uncertain, a vast canvas waiting to be painted with decisions, sacrifices, and ultimately, the pursuit of happiness. Isabella knew that the choice before her was not simply about geography or career, but about the kind of life she envisioned for herself and for James. It was a moment of truth, a crucible where dreams, love, and the scars of the past converged to form a single decisive path forward. 4 hours, they deliberated, dissecting every fear and every hope with painstaking honesty. Isabella's mind wandered through images of Paris, the art, the culture, the promise of a fresh start, juxtaposed against the familiar rhythm of New York life, where every street corner and every memory was intertwined with both pain and the slow healing of time. Alexander shared his own dreams, not of a perfect reconciliation, but of a future where both could flourish as individuals and as co-parents. He spoke of plans to expand his charitable work, to dedicate resources to causes that mattered deeply to him, and of a vision where their son's laughter would not be overshadowed by the echoes of past mistakes. As the day turned into a long reflective evening, Isabella finally felt the weight of her decision begin to lift, replaced by a cautious, burgeoning sense of clarity. She realized that while the path ahead might be fraught with challenges, it was hers to walk, and that sometimes, the truest act of love is to allow the one you care about to chase their dreams, even if it means stepping away, even if only temporarily. Standing by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, Isabella felt a newfound resolve settle over her. "I need time to think, Alexander," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion behind it. "This isn't a decision I can make in a single moment. I need to consider what it means for me, for James, and for everything we've rebuilt together." Alexander nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. "Take all the time you need. I want you to be happy, truly happy. And I promise, no matter what, I will always be here for you and James. Our bond isn't confined by walls or even cities. It's something that we have to nurture, even when the winds of change blow fiercely." In that long lingering moment of shared silence and mutual respect, the magnitude of the choice before them became undeniable. It was a turning point, one where the past, with all its heartbreak and lessons, would meet the future, painted in hues of both ambition and tender care. As Isabella stared out into the unfolding night, she felt the stirring of hope mingled with the echoes of old pain, a reminder that every ending was also a beginning. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, Isabella embraced the truth that the journey ahead would require sacrifices and strength, both in the pursuit of her own dreams and in the quiet commitment to nurture the fragile love that had begun to blossom between them. The moment of truth had arrived, and in that profound instant, the seeds of a future, uncertain, yet filled with potential, were sown, ready to grow in the light of honest choices and unyielding hope. After what felt like an eternity of reflection, Isabella found herself standing on the banks of the Seine at dusk, a solitary figure wrapped in a cashmere scarf, gazing out over the gentle ripples of water under the golden glow of Parisian street lamps. The city of art and romance, with its boulevards lined with quaint cafés and centuries-old architecture, had long promised a renaissance of her creative spirit. And yet, as Isabella wandered along the river's edge, every elegant monument and every whispered note of an accordion carried with it a bittersweet echo of what she had left behind. For weeks in Paris, Isabella had immersed herself in a world of vibrant galleries, poetic cafes, and endless inspiration. The new job had offered her a canvas to express her inner self, a place where her visions could finally be given life in strokes of passion and creativity. She spent her mornings in sunlit studios, her afternoons strolling through art markets, and her evenings scribbling fervently in a notebook while watching the world go by. Yet amid the allure of creativity and cultural splendor, an unyielding emptiness began to gnaw at her soul. There was a persistent soft murmur in her heart, a reminder of laughter once shared, of whispered apologies, and of promises that had yet to be fulfilled. Late one evening, as the city slept under a veil of mist, Isabella sat alone in her modest Parisian flat. The room, adorned with sketches and the remnants of her latest projects, felt strangely hollow despite its beauty. Her phone vibrated softly on the bedside table, a simple message from a colleague asking if she missed home. That one word, home, struck Isabella with unexpected force. In the quiet that followed, she realized that no masterpiece, however grand, could capture the depth of her longing for a place where her heart felt safe, a place where love and family intertwined to create a sanctuary from life's relentless storms. In the solitude of that night, memories of New York surged forth like a tide. She remembered the soft murmur of Alexander's voice as he cradled James in the dim light of early mornings, the way his eyes, once cold and calculating, had grown tender with the weight of responsibility and regret. She recalled the moments of fragile reconciliation, quiet conversations in the hospital corridor, the long, honest talks beneath the glow of streetlights, and the gentle persistence with which he had tried to rebuild what was lost. Every memory, however painful, carried the unmistakable scent of home, of a love that had been worth fighting for. Days turned into weeks, and the vibrant pulse of Paris began to lose its luster against the backdrop of her inner turmoil. While her colleagues celebrated new projects and bright prospects, Isabella felt increasingly adrift. She attended lavish exhibitions and inspiring lectures, yet each success was marred by the realization that something essential was missing. It was as if the canvas of her life, though now filled with vivid colors and bold strokes, was incomplete without the subtle enduring hues of the life she had once known. One brisk afternoon, as autumn leaves danced outside her window, Isabella sat at a small cafe terrace on a cobblestone street. The chatter of locals and the clink of coffee cups filled the air, yet her mind was miles away. A tender memory of James' giggle during a lazy Sunday afternoon in New York made her pause mid-sip. In that fleeting moment, she saw in her mind's eye the delicate balance of chaos and comfort that defined her life back home, a life where even amidst trials, there existed a deep, unspoken connection between her, Alexander, and their son. It was the kind of love that, despite its bruises and scars, had never truly faded. That evening, as the Parisian sky turned a dusky shade of violet and the city's lights flickered on like hopeful stars, Isabella made a decision. The dreams she had chased here were magnificent, but they were not enough to silence the yearning for a home where laughter and shared pain coexisted, where every challenge was met together. She realized that her heart had been quietly whispering the truth all along. She did not want to build a life solely defined by career success and artistic fulfillment. What she truly craved was the kind of love that could mend broken pieces, a love that was worth fighting for, even if it meant returning to a past filled with imperfections. In the days that followed, Isabella began preparing for a journey that was as much about physical travel as it was about emotional pilgrimage. Packing her few cherished belongings, she folded into her suitcase mementos of her time in Paris: a pressed flower from a cafe table, a sketch of a sunset over the Seine, and a handwritten note from a fellow artist praising her unique vision. Each item was a reminder of the beauty she had discovered, but also of the solitude that had shadowed her accomplishments. On her final day in Paris, Isabella took one last long walk along the river. The water glistened under the soft drizzle, and as she crossed a small stone bridge, she paused to watch the reflection of the city merge with the dark currents below. It was in that silent communion with the city that she found clarity. Her heart, heavy with both hope and sorrow, whispered that love was not something to be abandoned in pursuit of personal ambition. It was the very reason to strive for greatness. The dream of Paris, with its artistic promise, would forever be a part of her story, but it was not the story she wished to live exclusively. Her soul yearned for the messy, challenging, and ultimately rewarding journey of rebuilding relationships, of forging a future with Alexander, and of nurturing the life of their son, James. The decision crystallized like morning dew on a spring petal. Isabella would return to New York, to the city that had been the backdrop of her most profound joys and sorrows. It was a return not as a retreat from ambition, but as an embrace of what truly mattered. She booked a flight, feeling both the pang of farewell and the excitement of coming home. In the quiet hours of the night before her departure, she penned a letter to herself, a promise to honor her past, to learn from it, and to let love guide her forward. The journey back was long and reflective. As the airplane ascended into the vast starry expanse of the night sky, Isabella watched as Paris receded into a tapestry of lights, and her thoughts turned to New York, the city that had shaped her in countless indelible ways. With every passing mile, she felt her heart lighten, buoyed by the conviction that the love she had once taken for granted was the very anchor that would keep her from drifting away. Upon landing in New York, the familiar cacophony of the city greeted her, a blend of honking taxis, distant chatter, and the unmistakable hum of a metropolis that never truly slept. Stepping out into the brisk air, Isabella felt a rush of emotions, nostalgia, relief, and an unyielding hope that she had chosen the right path. As she navigated the bustling streets, her phone buzzed with a message, a simple heartfelt note from Alexander, asking how she was and reminding her that no matter the distance, his heart remained tethered to hers. In that moment, Isabella's resolve solidified. The dream of Paris had been enchanting, a kaleidoscope of colors and possibilities, yet it was the love she shared with Alexander and the irreplaceable bond with her son that truly defined her. The complexities of their past, the betrayals, the apologies, the quiet moments of reconciliation, had forged a connection that, though fragile, was resilient. Love, she realized, was not a destination marked by perfection, but a journey filled with struggles and triumphs, where every wound held the promise of healing and every goodbye carried the hope of a welcome return. As Isabella made her way home, each step felt like a declaration, a commitment to the life she wanted to rebuild, not in isolation, but with the people who had shaped her in ways she was only now ready to embrace. In the familiar skyline of New York, she saw the outlines of possibilities, the hope of new beginnings, the promise of second chances, and the undeniable truth that some loves are indeed worth fighting for. That night, as she reunited with Alexander and James in the warm glow of their modest New York apartment, the air was thick with unspoken apologies and tentative dreams. Their embrace was not perfect. It was fraught with the scars of old wounds and the challenges of rebuilding trust. But in that embrace lay an unspoken vow, a promise that despite the distances traveled and the hearts bruised along the way, their love could endure. In that moment, surrounded by the familiar clamor of a city that had seen it all, Isabella knew that she had come home not just to a place, but to a love worth fighting for, a love that, despite its trials, would light the way toward a future where every tear and every smile wove together the tapestry of a life reborn. The day had been long and filled with hesitant anticipation, and as dusk settled over the city, the familiar skyline of New York seemed to pulse with a quiet promise of new beginnings. Isabella, her heart a tumult of hope and trepidation, found herself once again standing before a doorway that symbolized both the past she had tried so hard to leave behind and the future she was daring to embrace. In her arms, James slept soundly, a small peaceful reminder of the love and life that had guided her through so many uncertain nights. For weeks, the distance between Isabella and Alexander had grown into an ocean of unspoken apologies, lingering doubts, and the bittersweet memories of what once was. But on this evening, as the cool autumn air carried a soft, gentle breeze through the busy New York streets, that distance began to dissolve. The moment was set, a reunion that was neither grand in its theatrics nor hurried by desperation, but quiet, tender, and profoundly human. Isabella's footsteps echoed softly as she approached the familiar brownstone building, each step heavy with memories, of laughter and tears, of arguments and reconciliations, of a love that had been both shattered and rebuilt, piece by delicate piece. She paused for a moment in front of the door, taking a deep breath as if to steady herself for what was to come. With a final glance at the starry sky overhead, she pressed the doorbell. The sound of the bell reverberated in the quiet hallway, mingling with a low hum of distant traffic and the whisper of leaves stirred by the evening wind. Moments later, the door swung open, revealing Alexander standing there in the soft glow of a lamp, his expression a complex tapestry of surprise, relief, and vulnerability. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of Isabella, no longer the guarded woman who had once vowed never to return, but a person reborn through the crucible of her own journey, her face etched with both the hardships of her past and the quiet strength of hope. For an instant, time itself seemed to pause. There was no dramatic music, no grand declarations, only the profound silence of two hearts meeting again after long separation. Alexander's eyes softened as he took a hesitant step forward, as if he were about to bridge the years of distance and pain with one genuine gesture. "Isabella," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper yet resonant with a depth of emotion that filled the space between them. Without another word, Isabella, with James cradled tenderly in her arms, stepped forward. The moment was delicate, fragile like the first buds of spring emerging after a long barren winter. "I don't want to run anymore," she said softly, her voice trembling with both sorrow and determination. Her admission was raw and unadorned, stripping away all pretenses until only the truth remained, a truth that spoke of past wounds and future hopes intertwined in the fragile bond of shared responsibility and love. Alexander's response was immediate and heartfelt. In one fluid, unhesitating motion, he closed the remaining gap between them, enveloping Isabella in a warm embrace that was as much an apology as it was a promise. For a long, lingering moment, they simply stood there, two souls pressed together in a silent communion that needed no words. The cool air, the distant hum of the city, even the soft murmur of late-night traffic, all faded into insignificance as the reunion unfolded in the quiet intimacy of that doorway. As they slowly drew apart, still holding on to each other's warmth, Alexander's eyes glistened with tears that he had long tried to hide. "I've missed you," he whispered, his voice thick with regret and longing. "Every day, I've carried the weight of what I did, of what I lost. I was so lost in my own ambitions that I forgot the true meaning of home. And home is you and James." Isabella's gaze searched his face, a face that had once been so distant, now laid bare in its sincere remorse and tender hope. "I've missed you too," she replied, her voice wavering between relief and guarded optimism. "I've spent countless nights wondering if there was a way back. If there was any chance that the love we once had could be resurrected, that we could rebuild something real from all the broken pieces." Their conversation, tender and unhurried, flowed naturally in the quiet sanctuary of the apartment's entryway. They spoke of lost time and the harsh lessons they had both learned in separation. Alexander recounted the nights filled with regret, the solitude of his penthouse that now seemed like an empty monument to his past mistakes. Isabella shared stories of her journey, a journey of self-discovery in a foreign land, the beauty of Paris intermingled with the bittersweet realization that her heart still yearned for the familiar chaos of New York and the imperfect, enduring love she had once known. Throughout the conversation, James remained a silent, precious presence, his innocent eyes watching his parents with an unspoken understanding that transcended the complexities of their emotions. In that quiet space, the boundaries of past hurt and future possibility blurred. The pain of betrayal, the scars of separation, and the uncertainty of forgiveness were all present, yet they were now met with a willingness to embrace vulnerability, to trust once more in the slow process of healing. The night deepened around them, and the gentle glow of the apartment's lamps cast soft shadows that danced along the walls, shadows that seemed to celebrate the beauty of a reunion built not on sweeping gestures, but on the earnest desire to be together again. Alexander led Isabella inside, and as they sat in the cozy warmth of their shared living room, time appeared to stretch out infinitely. There were no promises made in that moment, no declarations of eternal love or vows of unbroken perfection. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that their journey was far from over, and that every step forward would require patience, humility, and above all, the courage to confront the past with open hearts. In that embrace of the night, as the city outside continued its ceaseless rhythm, Isabella and Alexander began the slow, deliberate process of reunion. They revisited old memories, not as a means to relive past glories or pains, but as a way to understand what had shaped them into the people they were now. The conversation turned to the little details, the shared glances over a family dinner, the sound of laughter echoing in a sunlit room, and the quiet moments when words were unnecessary because love was already present in every touch and every look. As the evening wore on, the walls of the apartment, which had once been witnesses to solitude and heartache, became a canvas upon which new memories could be painted. Isabella felt a cautious warmth begin to unfurl in her chest, a sense that perhaps, after all the battles fought and the tears shed, there remained a love worth nurturing. Alexander, with each soft-spoken word and tender gesture, rebuilt the bridge that had once seemed irreparably broken. When the night finally gave way to the soft light of early morning, the reunion had not healed every wound, nor had it erased every doubt. But it had planted a seed of hope that, with time and care, might blossom into a future where forgiveness and love coexisted with the scars of the past. In that sacred space between night and dawn, Isabella and Alexander found solace in the truth that sometimes, the most profound reunions are not marked by perfection, but by the quiet resilience of the human heart, a heart that dares to love again, even when the echoes of yesterday still linger in every beat. In the weeks following their heartfelt reunion, Isabella and Alexander slowly began weaving a new tapestry of life, one that was neither defined solely by the ghosts of their past nor by the shadows of previous mistakes, but by a deliberate day-to-day effort to build something lasting and true. The decision to move in together was not taken lightly. It was a conscious choice made with the understanding that healing required not only forgiveness but also shared vulnerability. They approached this new chapter with the awareness that every morning would be a chance to rebuild trust, every conversation a step toward mutual understanding, and every challenge an opportunity to prove that the love they had once thought lost was capable of evolving into something even more resilient. Their new home, a modest apartment in a vibrant yet unassuming neighborhood of New York, soon became a living testament to their commitment. The space was filled with both old mementos and new dreams, a carefully chosen collection of photographs that chronicled happier times, juxtaposed with fresh artwork that Isabella had created during her brief sojourn in Paris. Alexander, once a man solely defined by business and ambition, had learned to appreciate the beauty in simplicity. He spent evenings helping Isabella arrange the furniture, taking care not to rush or force changes, understanding that the transformation of their home paralleled the slow rebuilding of their hearts. Every day, they discovered new aspects of each other. Mornings began with a quiet ritual. Alexander would wake early to make coffee, rich and aromatic, while Isabella prepared breakfast with the same care she once reserved for her art. Their conversations, once fractured by past grievances, now flowed with a tentative warmth. Over steaming mugs of coffee, they discussed mundane things, the weather, a new book, even the playful antics of little James, whose laughter filled the apartment like a promise of better days. These small, shared moments gradually stitched together a fragile sense of normalcy and companionship. Despite the gentle progress, challenges were inevitable. Old habits, deeply ingrained and sometimes unintentional, would occasionally rear their head. There were moments when Alexander's instinct to control surfaced in subtle ways, insisting on a particular schedule for James's bedtime or wanting to oversee every detail of household chores. In those moments Isabella, drawing upon the strength she had cultivated during her time apart, would remind him gently, "We're building this together, Alexander. Trust is not given, it's earned day by day." Their discussions were not without friction, but over time they learned to negotiate, to apologize, and to listen with open hearts. They attended counseling sessions, where a patient therapist guided them through exercises designed to express feelings that were too raw or complicated for casual conversation. These sessions became sacred spaces where both could acknowledge their pain without judgment and envision a future unburdened by old resentments. Parenthood, too, brought its own set of lessons. As they navigated the unpredictable world of raising a young child, Isabella and Alexander discovered that the role of a parent required the kind of cooperation that neither had fully mastered before. Mornings often began with the gentle chaos of preparing James for the day, choosing outfits, coaxing him into a smile, and managing the inevitable tantrums. In these tender yet testing moments, Alexander learned to set aside his pride and fully immerse himself in the role of a nurturing father. He found joy in simple tasks, rocking James to sleep after a long day, reading him stories with animated voices, and even learning to change diapers with a humility that belied his former persona. Isabella, who had once felt abandoned in the trials of motherhood, now felt supported. Together, they became a team, discovering that their shared love for James was the strongest glue binding their fragile reconciliation. Their home transformed into a sanctuary of quiet celebrations and small victories. Weekend mornings were reserved for family outings, picnics in Central Park, strolls along the bustling streets of the city, and lazy afternoons in the park where James would chase bubbles and laugh with uninhibited delight. These outings, though simple, were imbued with a sense of renewal. Alexander often captured these moments on his camera, a candid shot of Isabella's radiant smile as she watched James play, a snapshot of his own gentle laughter, a picture that spoke of a family reimagined and a future redefined. Evenings brought moments of introspection and tender reconnection. After James was tucked into bed, the couple would often sit together in the quiet living room, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating their faces as they spoke of their dreams and regrets. They shared stories of the past, not to relive the pain, but to acknowledge it and learn from it. Alexander would sometimes whisper apologies for the times he had been absent, not only in body but in spirit. Isabella, with a gentle nod and a tearful smile, would express her hope that those mistakes could serve as the bedrock for something better. Their dialogues were filled with the promise of transformation, the promise that every apology, every shared tear, was a step toward a more compassionate understanding of one another. In these shared evenings, music often played softly in the background, a carefully curated blend of melodies that evoked memories of both sorrow and hope. They danced slowly in the quiet of the living room, a slow, hesitant waltz that symbolized the tentative steps they were taking together. It was in those moments that the past's harsh edges softened, and the future began to shimmer with the possibility of forgiveness and renewed love. Occasionally, they would invite close friends and family into their home, hesitant yet hopeful that the outside world might witness the transformation they were striving to achieve. Small gatherings became a way to celebrate progress and to affirm that the scars they bore were not signs of weakness, but of survival. Friends marveled at the gentle, reformed side of Alexander, a man who had once seemed untouchable in his perfection, and at Isabella's newfound openness, a radiance that came from embracing both her past and her potential. Through all these days of rebuilding, one truth remained constant: the journey was not linear. There were setbacks and moments of doubt. There were days when the weight of old hurts seemed to press down with a force that threatened to undo the tender progress made. Yet, each time, they found solace in their shared commitment to move forward, to nurture a future that honored both their individuality and their collective history. Their love, tested by time and tempered by loss, emerged not as an immaculate ideal but as something profoundly real, a mosaic of broken pieces carefully mended with patience, understanding, and above all, hope. As the seasons changed, so did the landscape of their relationship. Winter brought with it long, introspective nights, where the couple would sit by a crackling fire, wrapped in blankets and lost in conversation about the lessons learned and the dreams yet to be fulfilled. Spring heralded a time of renewal, both in nature and in their hearts. They spent afternoons in the park, planting small flowers in a community garden, a symbolic act of nurturing life from the earth, a metaphor for the tender growth happening within their own lives. Summer was filled with impromptu road trips and lazy evenings under starry skies, where laughter and whispered confidences wove together to form a tapestry of shared experiences. Through it all, Alexander and Isabella learned that building a future together was not about erasing the past, but about acknowledging its impact and choosing to move forward with intention. Their daily lives became a series of small, deliberate acts: a shared cup of coffee at sunrise, a spontaneous note left on the kitchen counter, a hug after a long day, that collectively reaffirmed their commitment to each other. They discovered that love was not a destination to be reached, but a continuous journey of rediscovery, compromise, and growth. In the quiet moments before sleep, as the city outside settled into a soft, reflective hum, Alexander would often gaze at Isabella with a look of profound gratitude. He had come to understand that every misstep, every broken promise, had led him to this moment, a moment where he could finally offer not just apologies but genuine, unguarded love. Isabella, too, found that her heart, once so hardened by betrayal, could soften again, that she could allow herself to hope without the constant fear of being hurt. Together, they built a future that was not defined by the grandiosity of their past ambitions or the sharp edges of their previous conflicts, but by the gentle, enduring rhythm of everyday life. Their home, once a battleground of memories, became a sanctuary of healing, a place where every shared laugh, every tear of understanding, and every small victory contributed to the slow but steady construction of a life renewed. In this ongoing journey, Isabella and Alexander found that the most beautiful structures are not those built overnight, but those carefully assembled piece by piece, each fragment a testament to resilience and the unwavering belief that love, in its most honest form, is always worth fighting for. In the gentle glow of a New York sunrise, the echoes of yesterday's trials and triumphs melded into the promise of a new day, a day that bore witness to a love transformed by time, pain, and the resolute desire to rebuild. The journey that had once been defined by fractured trust and bitter separation had, through countless small gestures and hard-won reconciliations, evolved into something tender and resilient. Now, as the city slowly stirred awake beneath a soft blanket of early light, Isabella, Alexander, and little James gathered to celebrate not merely a new day, but the culmination of a long, arduous journey toward healing, a journey that had taught them that even the most shattered hearts could be mended with care, patience, and unwavering commitment. The celebration was simple yet profound. In the modest living room of their reclaimed apartment, family and close friends had gathered for James's first birthday, a milestone that symbolized the rebirth of hope and the enduring strength of a family that had been forged in the crucible of loss and redemption. The room was adorned with handmade decorations and soft, warm lights that created an atmosphere of intimate joy. Laughter, gentle and spontaneous, filled the air as children ran about, and old friends shared stories that traced the arc of transformation from sorrow to joy. For Isabella, every smile and every tender moment was a tribute to her own journey, a journey marked by painful lessons and the eventual discovery of self-worth and a rekindled love. Alexander, once a man whose ambition had eclipsed his heart, now moved with deliberate tenderness. He sat quietly by a large window, watching the golden afternoon light play upon the city's rooftops, his mind echoing with memories of past mistakes and the redemption that had come with each heartfelt apology and every shared moment of vulnerability. The years of estrangement, the countless nights of regret, had all led him to the singular truth that the love he harbored for Isabella and James was not a fleeting fancy, but a commitment he would nurture every single day. His eyes, softened by remorse and glowing with newfound determination, met Isabella's across the room, a silent promise that he would never again let pride or ambition come between them. As the celebration progressed, the family's bond was felt in every gentle touch and whispered word. Over a dinner prepared together, a meal that combined recipes passed down through generations with a few new, hopeful experiments of their own, the conversation flowed freely. Isabella recounted the quiet strength she had discovered in the face of adversity, the artful ways she had found to heal and reinvent herself. Alexander listened intently, his voice low and sincere as he acknowledged the pain he had caused, pledging, not with grand declarations but with consistent, humble actions, to be the partner and father that they all deserved. Their dialogue was not a recitation of perfect forgiveness but an honest exchange of hopes, fears, and dreams, a conversation that built a bridge from the scars of the past to the bright possibility of tomorrow. Later that night, as the guests gradually departed and the softness of New York settled over the apartment once more, Isabella and Alexander found themselves alone in the quiet sanctuary of their living room. The flickering light of a single lamp cast gentle shadows on the walls, reminiscent of the struggles they had endured. Sitting side by side on an old well-worn sofa, they spoke in hushed tones about the future. They talked of small plans, a shared weekend trip, continuing family therapy, and even the possibility of new adventures that would allow them to learn more about each other. There was no magic formula, no instantaneous erasure of past pain. There was only the honest, steady work of rebuilding trust, day by day. As the night deepened, Alexander took Isabella's hand in his voice soft yet resolute. "I know I can never fully undo the hurt I caused, and I know that there will be days when the shadows of our past feel overwhelming. But I promise you, with every breath I take, I will work to create a life for us that is defined not by regret, but by the strength of our love and our determination to be better, for you, for James, and for me." Isabella's eyes shone with unshed tears as she nodded slowly, her heart echoing his promise. In that sacred moment of mutual understanding, the heavy burdens of yesterday seemed to lift ever so slightly, replaced by a quiet certainty that what they were building together was real, imperfect, and infinitely precious. In the days, months, and years that followed, the family learned that a love that lasts is not one that remains untouched by hardship, but one that grows deeper with every challenge faced and every wound slowly healed. Their home became a living archive of their journey, a blend of cherished old photographs and new memories created in everyday moments. Shared breakfasts in a sunlit kitchen, spontaneous dance parties in the living room, long walks in Central Park where the laughter of James echoed like a song of hope, and quiet evenings spent reading and reminiscing. Each moment, whether filled with joy or tinged with sadness, was a brushstroke in the grand tapestry of their shared life. The city, with all its relentless energy and vibrant unpredictability, bore witness to their ongoing evolution. New York's sprawling streets and timeless skyline became a backdrop not for isolation, but for the enduring testament of a family that had learned to rise above its past. In every corner of that bustling metropolis, there were reminders of their resilience, small acts of kindness, unexpected reunions, and the promise of renewal that came with each sunrise. And so, as the seasons turned and the years unfolded like the pages of an ever-changing book, Isabella and Alexander continued to walk hand in hand along the winding path of life. Their love, tempered by trials and buoyed by forgiveness, had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that even when hearts are broken, they can be mended with care, persistence, and a willingness to embrace both the pain and the beauty of being human. In the quiet moments before sleep, as the gentle rhythm of the city lulled them into a peaceful reverie, they would often reflect on the long, winding road that had brought them to this point. They knew that there would always be challenges ahead, that the scars of the past might never entirely fade. But they also understood that those very scars were proof of their survival, of the battles fought and won in the name of love. For in the end, true love endures, it evolves, it transforms, and it remains steadfast even in the face of life's most relentless storms. Thus, in the tender embrace of that New York morning, with James's laughter echoing through the halls and the promise of another day shimmering on the horizon, Isabella and Alexander reaffirmed their silent vow to cherish every moment, to forgive when needed, and to build a future together that honored both the lessons of the past and the infinite possibilities of tomorrow. Their love, hard-won and deeply felt, was a testament to the enduring power of the human heart, a love that, against all odds, would last a lifetime and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey and for watching our video to the very end. We hope you enjoyed following Isabella and Alexander's story of heartbreak, healing, and the enduring power of love. Your support means the world to us. If you found this story moving or inspiring, please give us a thumbs up, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We truly appreciate your time and engagement. Thank you for being part of our community, and we look forward to sharing more meaningful stories with you soon.